excited to be back recording some more podcasts. What do you have in store for us today?
Something very interesting, I think. I call it synonyms for providence. There are certain ways you can talk about providence. And we're going to base today's podcast on a book. It's by a man named Edward Panosian. Mm-hmm. He was a friend of mine. He was 9 days younger than me. He's with the Lord now.
Yes.
But he was 9 days younger than me. And he was Armenian. Now, that's not theology. That's a country.
The country, yes.
And actually, his family came out of Armenia because the Muslims came into that country and snuck in under the guise of the First World War and distracted attention from the war to use to kill over 1 million Armenians.
Wow.
And Ed's father escaped. And of course, Ed was born here in the United States 9 days after me. And he's written a very good book. His book's been written about him. And it's called A Story of God's Gracious Providence. And we need to know this. It says, as you read this book, you'll be more informed about the past and more inspired for the future. And our quotes are going to come out of this book, a lot of it, and things that I've heard Ed Panosian say personally. And so I want you to know that we are quoting out of this book, and we know the people.
Good.
So I think we're safe in what we say.
Good.
And so I want to begin, and I'm going to call it The Providence of God in History by Dr. Edward Panosian. Okay. All through history, there have always been people who held to the truth. Aren't you glad?
Yes.
And they were within and without the Church of Rome. There were people who didn't believe like we believe, but they still, this is something that I don't completely understand. In almost any area you go, there are people who don't agree with everything. I remember, I think I may have said this before in one of our podcasts.
Yeah.
I was sitting next to a lady on an airplane many years ago, probably 40 years ago. She's well-dressed, very nice, and so I asked her, what do you do? She said, I'm a nun. I said, what? And I said, well, let me ask you, do you go to the Pope for guidance? She said, no, I go directly to Jesus Christ. I said, you don't confess to a priest? No, I don't need to. I talk to Christ himself. She said, I believe in him. He's my Savior. And she gave me the gospel. And so I think in almost anywhere you go, and that's what he's saying here. They were within and without the Church of Rome. God was not without witness in any age. Yes. Aren't we glad?
Yes.
God always has a witness.
And Charles Spurgeon said, the sovereign arbiter of destiny holds in his own hand all the issues of our life. We are not waifs and orphans and strays in the ocean of faith, but are steered by infinite wisdom toward the desired haven. Providence is a soft pillow for anxious heads.
Boy, do I love to quote Spurgeon.
Yes.
You ought to get that one written down, you folks that are listening, okay? But on this introduction to the book of Esther, providence is the hand of God in the glove of history, and the glove will never move until he moves it.
That's good. Well, and providence is God superintending in the affairs of nations and men, for it is God that is pro-videoing. In other words, he sees before, he goes before us. For a Christian, then, there is no accident. Accidio means to happen. So no matter what happens, nothing just happens.
Boy, isn't that good? We need to realize these things. This is from a real man of God who loved the Lord, and we need to realize these things. So now in talking about history, 17th century Massachusetts, quote from Ed Panosian, history is the memorial of God's mercies for his purposes, so that our posterity may know them, remember them, and hymn his praises. Notice how he brings music into it. That's what you and I are talking about, Tim.
Oh, yeah.
The music relates to all of this, so go ahead.
Yes, it does. Well, I'm thinking about the Spanish Armada in 1066, the 9th century. The Spanish ships were kept from landing on English soil. This was called the Protestant wind. Dozens of their ships were dashed on the coast of Europe, Dutch territory, the Netherlands. Spain lost most of her ships and never really recovered. The Puritans were then able to come to the New World, to a land preserved by God in the temperate zones of the world, an uncivilized place of refuge 400 years ago.
It's so fascinating to think back to that. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Tim. But
that's good.
So to think about what God was doing 400 years ago that we are still reaping the benefits of.
Yes.
So go ahead and finish up with what
absolutely.
Ed said there.
History then records the French Revolution. While England experienced the English Revival, the Republican government in France changed countless times. While we are still in our first one, in 1976 we celebrated the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. That was also the 1500th anniversary of the fall of Rome.
Ed, as a church historian, he saw things that I never thought of before. That 200th, our 200th anniversary was the 1500th anniversary of the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
He put all those things together. See, that God knew each one. God's not limited by time. God made time.
Yes.
But he's not limited by time.
Right.
Okay. But then I've got down here what Ed said. Man proposes, God disposes. On the front and the back of a coin, from that time back then, that's where Ed got that. It was a coin. It said that man proposes, but God disposes.
Well, and someone asked Benjamin Franklin what our form of government is. Well, Franklin said, it's a republic, if you can keep it. A republic endures until the people discover that they can vote themselves from the public treasury.
Boy, is that happening.
Oh, yes.
And these men were not only talking about what was going on, they were acting like prophets. And that's so interesting to me. We're going to be talking either today or in one of our podcasts pretty soon about a book that I wrote in 1974. How many years ago is that? Well, that's 60-some years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still valid. That I'm not a prophet, but God must have given me insight because I was looking to him for guidance. And when we look to God for guidance, he goes way beyond anything we could probably expect. Or as long as we give God the credit for what he does, then we don't take the credit for it. Then that's what you and I do. And I hope people realize that as we're talking about it.
Yes.
Even today or whenever these next podcasts.
Yep. Want to give God the glory all the time.
Amen.